Morning, we're back with another video on dahlias. This video we're going to cover your questions you sent in about dahlia storage. So first up, Jen, do you want to talk us through some of the ways that you've stored your dahlias over the years and what you've found?
So right from when I first started growing dahlias, I think the main method initially was using sawdust. With that, I had a few seasons of hit and misses. Some varieties stored really well in the sawdust, some didn't, and most of them were divided right at the start as well. So it depends whether you divide them at the time when you dig or whether you store them in the clumps.
Yeah, I did that my first season too. I did sawdust and I divided, and again, some were absolutely fine and some weren't. One thing to note, we are in a really dry climate, so we have really low humidity. So in other climates you probably won't have problems with tubers drying out, but here we have a real problem with tubers drying out. So moisture's is generally not the enemy bit.
Although I've had a couple of
Although
seasons.
then the next season was really damp, wasn't it? We all started getting a bit of mould, which was unusual.
Because the season so far has been quite dry, so frosty but dry. So
what did you do next season?
So I think I probably did 2 years with the sawdust, and then the next season after a couple of years was the vermiculite as well. So the vermiculite is also, it's one that I found some varieties stored really well in the vermiculite, and then I've had others where side by side there's two bins, one's completely rotted and the other is pristine, like is just as they were when you dug them. So I think for me personally, it's not something that we won't be storing again. They're great for when I package up and ship, because they do kind of retain the moisture and don't let the tubers dry out in transit and things like that. So when I sell tubers and you receive them from us, that will be what they'll be coming in, so that they're kind of looked after and protected. But storage wise, for me personally, I won't be using vermiculite again, but that's not to say you shouldn't. It just depends on where you are and how it works.
Yeah, definitely. With all of this, there's so many options, and you just need to experiment and see what works in your environment. There was a specific question on vermiculite from someone asking whether you added any moisture to the vermiculite before you used it.
Some of it was slightly damp that I used, and then some of it was completely dry. So I think perhaps if I hadn't divided and just washed and stored my tuber clumps in vermiculite, I think that possibly would have made a difference to how they stored. So I think a little bit of moisture is possibly okay, but then it's so many variables depending on where you are, depending on your humidity over the winter, whether you've got a more kind of like your climate's kind of, what do you call it? Dry, humid. Or you can kind of control it as well. Like if you've got these certain places, like if you've got air conditioning, that you can keep it at a low temperature, or if you've got if it's more open aired. Some people are very fortunate and they can just kind of dig and leave them outside and not worry about it.
Yes, I've definitely seen it up in the North Island. They can literally chuck it under a hedge or put it in the crates and just kind of leave them under a tree. Definitely can't do that in Central Otago.
No.
But in other parts of the country. So talk to people who garden around you and ask what they do and what they've had success doing. And as we said, every season is different. So another question is, do you wash your clumps or leave them unwashed? And we've both experimented with this one as well.
So for myself, I've found the best way to store our tubers. They seem to be best with the dirt left on, as I mentioned in a previous video, and just as they are. It seems to have the best survival rate, less rot. The actual tubers themselves stay reasonably plump, and that's due to just being in the soil that they were growing in as well, so they don't seem to, they're not as disturbed or anything like that. But then I've heard a lot of people, they wash all the dirt off and then store in sawdust or vermiculite. So I think it is definitely one of those things that is trial and error. and having been growing for, it's probably 10 years now with the dahlias, then yeah, it's working out what works for you and in your climate. And I think just with our climate the way it is, it's changing every year and it's different, and you'll find one year it's really mild and then other years
it's really wet and damp.
And we've had it so cold this year so far, and then it'll be different again next year. So
last year I had them in my garden shed and they got frosted and they all rotted.
Yeah.
And the previous year they'd been fine. So it depends year on year. But the other thing I'd mention, I stored in clumps, and I find that worked much better for us because ours tend to shrivel here. Yes. But you just have to be careful that your soil isn't too moist, because if you've got really moist soil right in at the crown, I found when I went to divide, that soil was still damp.
Yeah.
And some of them had started to rot. Yeah. So that's just something to be aware. But our soil is generally quite dry here when we're digging, if you do dig. Yes. So it isn't such a concern.
Yeah, that's the other thing I didn't mention, was when you are digging, try and make sure that you've had 2 or 3 days beforehand without any rain, so that way the soil is a bit more dry when you're actually digging. Otherwise, if you're digging when you've had quite a lot of moisture in the soil, and if you're leaving the soil on the clumps, then it tends to be quite glue. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
I think that's it for this video. So I hope that answered some questions around storage, but really it's trial and error. There's lots of options. There's heaps of material out there on YouTube and in books, but just ask your neighbours, ask your gardeners, and that's always the best source, I find.
Yeah, people have done it before.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for listening. Bye.